Um, it's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for the invite. I'm going to talk a little bit about Science Europe's work over the last few years on the topic of research cultures, where this focus came from for us, what it means to us, and how we've been taking action on it recently. Before joining Science Europe, as Giovanna mentioned, I was a postdoctoral researcher here in Belgium. And I think like all early career researchers, I was pretty aware of the kinds of issues and pressures within the research system. And I think now looking back, having been at Science Europe for 5 or 6 years, I think that this focus on research cultures is really important and really impactful, and can help us move towards a system that's more supportive of researchers and all research professionals, and in doing so also more supportive of research quality and impact. And I think that's the link that we've been trying to develop at Science Europe, with our partners, with our work over the last few years. So some of you might not know Science Europe. We're a membership organization based in Brussels, with members that include the major national public research funding organizations from across the continent, and also a number of national research performing organizations. We currently have 40 members that collectively contribute around 25 billion euros to research each year. And our membership includes very large funders like UK Research and Innovation and the German Research Foundation, but also funders from much smaller national systems like the Estonian Research Council or the Research Council of Lithuania. And we also have a number of big research performing organizations and institutes like the Spanish National Research Council or the Italian National Institute for Nuclear Physics. And I think this mix of funders and performers gives us a really interesting perspective, especially on more research-facing policy topics like research culture. So at Science Europe, over the last 5 years, our work has covered 3 strategic priorities. Firstly, on European research policy, so mostly focused on the European research area, the EU framework programs, and international cooperation, both within Europe and outside of Europe. Research culture, which is the area that I look after, and I'll talk about a bit more about this throughout this presentation. And a third priority on the links between science and society, and science for tackling societal challenges, including topics like greening research and science advice mechanisms. So in 2021, when we launched this strategy, we didn't really know what we meant by research cultures or what the positions of our members were on the topic, or whether they were even using the term research culture. The concept arose from a long-standing focus on research assessment, which is something that's clearly part of the daily business of all our member organizations, so both funders and performers, through grant allocation and through career progression exercises, respectively. And in 2019, we had conducted a study of the assessment practices of our members and followed it up with a position statement and a set of recommendations on assessment processes that covered a wide range of topics, from things like transparency to experimental approaches, and from bias and discrimination to reviewer selection policies. And I think there are many recommendations in there that are still very relevant today. And our overall position called for a broad reform of research assessment, which in part led us at Science Europe with the European Commission and the European University Association to the drafting of the DORA agreement and the launch of that movement. But in this work, we found it quite hard to disentangle assessment policies from other priority areas that we were trying to work on. So things like gender equality or open science or research precarity. And for our members, assessment mechanisms are probably a main way that organizations can make positive changes to their national research systems, changing how researchers are supported, recognized, rewarded, and incentivized. And we thought that research cultures might be a way of connecting these different policy topics together, looking more holistically at how funders and performers shape their respective national systems through the policies that they implement, and how those policies are connected to the daily lives of researchers and research professionals and the work that they do. And we took inspiration from some of the activities that had been taking place at the time in the UK, from UKRI, from the Royal Society, and from the Wellcome Trust. And I think this diagram from a Royal Society workshop in 2016 really nicely captures what we wanted research cultures to be about. So it's about focusing on all the people that do and enable research on a daily basis and their career opportunities. It's about the importance of training and guidance and how research organizations need to support policy changes in this way. It's a means of focusing on the research process itself rather than just research outputs. It's a way to think about how open science and open access intersect with assessment policies and career conditions, and also the role that research plays with society by engaging the public and research wherever it's relevant to do so. And I think all of these things and more touch upon research culture and what it is all about for us at Science Europe, and particularly that all of these aspects, and that's where I think this diagram really nicely shows this, are in some way dependent on one another and connected, and having a broad overview is really important. However, at Science Europe, whereas research cultures had, I think, been tackled at the time at the level of single institutions or within single national systems, we had an additional challenge of thinking about it across different levels of organization, all the way up to, if there is a common approach to research culture in Europe, what might that common approach look like? And this means thinking about culture from individual perspectives, so the daily behaviors of researchers, to team dynamics and how people collaborate and work together, to institutional environments and national systems, and finally how those national systems collaborate and cooperate, and what all of those different levels contribute and say about the culture that we all do research in. And this also covers a variety of types of interventions that we think all need to be considered collectively. And I'm going to come back to that towards the end of this presentation with an example of how I think and how at Science Europe we've been thinking about linking behaviors of individuals to national or even international missions. But on where to start for us, we wanted something that could bring all of these perspectives together, and bring all of these different levels of organization together around the table to have a discussion. And using that Royal Society definition as a basis, we agreed that the concept of values was probably a good starting point. And so between 2021 and 2022, we had a number of individual and collective discussions with our members about the values that underpin national research systems in Europe. We asked our members whether they thought that values were important to research systems, and of course they said yes. We asked if their organizations followed a certain set of values, and again they said yes. And then we asked what those values were, and this was where we heard it was a bit trickier to answer. So although they felt that they were guided by sets of values, these values were in many cases unwritten or presumed. But over the course of discussions of what kinds of values our members hold as part of their work, we saw a set of common themes appearing, and eventually across our entire membership, we agreed on a set of shared values as shown in this slide, upon which we could base our future work. So it's important to say that these are not exclusive. Organizations may have more, may have slightly different meanings or focuses within those value clusters. But importantly, they're all common elements that we could agree across our broad membership and at a Europe-wide level. And importantly, we made it clear that these apply to the research process itself, but also to how research is managed and governed. So both the external and internal workings of research organizations. And using these shared values as a basis, we've since been applying them to different topics, from diversity and inclusion, where we published a practical guide on supporting diversity in research systems, to integrity and ethics, how we make policy changes that better support good research practice within labs and in offices, and more recently to careers in research and how open science is assessed. And all of these projects contribute to helping to embed our values more deeply in the policies and practices of our member organizations, but also reflect on how these advances contribute to shifts in research cultures overall. And at the end of last year, with this set of specific topical projects completed, we wanted to bring back into focus that more holistic overview, again, recognizing that all actions are interdependent. As examples, we can't move in one direction on open science without thinking about its consequences on the career progression of young researchers, or we shouldn't change assessment practices without thinking about the possible effects or unintended consequences on diversity and inclusion. And also recognizing that this is not only about the actions of research organizations like our members, so funders and national performers, but how we work together with universities and the research community to make sure that there is alignment wherever it's beneficial, making links to major initiatives like the recent movement on Diamond Open Access, or to reform initiatives like DORA and like DORA, recognizing that these all play a role in shaping research governance, but also the way that people go about their daily lives and work within the research sector and the careers that they have, and also the research process itself. And that with all this, there remains this common mission, and that's something else that we've heard from all of our member organizations, that all of the actions that they take and the interventions that they make are working towards a common mission, and that is supporting and enabling knowledge advancement and ensuring research quality and impact. And that's really the headline of our recently published vision, that we can bring all of these individual advances and perspectives together under one umbrella and link them at one end to a set of shared values that we think are really important to the way that research is done, but also the way that research is managed. And at the other end to a common mission that all our member organizations, and we think that many research organizations from around the world would agree would be a really important mission for research, and that is knowledge advancement and research excellence and quality. And as part of this vision, we took on that concept and we present a set of 8 goals that are to that should be seen as a way of guiding future actions. And these goals are, I think, purposefully idealistic. We had a discussion, quite a rich discussion with our members on how idealistic we should be versus realism. But I think the general consensus was that this was a good time to try and be quite positive and idealistic and set a long-term perspective for the system. And these 8 goals cover things like attractive careers in research, open and inclusive science, sustainability, and the importance of academic freedom in research. And we think that stating these goals publicly, as I said, is really timely. Research systems are evolving ever quicker. Technological advances like AI are having impacts and effects on the way that research is done, but also the processes of research organizations. Research is getting, in many cases, more complex and expensive, often needing larger infrastructure and more international collaboration. And there is increasing uncertainty and pressure in other political areas that are impacting upon research, both in terms of research budgets, but also in terms of the political influence on research focuses and mistrust from the public. And with these challenges and uncertainties, we think it's important to remain grounded on our shared values and be public about a long-term perspective and the actions that we need to prioritize to get there for the research system. So alongside this vision, we also developed a framework of conditions based on what we've learned from our actions over recent years that I think can help in developing more effective action moving forward. And I'll come back to some of those in a later slide when I talk about introducing the concept of tracking progress. But this vision is only really a starting point for us. It provides a basis upon which we think we can take more coherent and connected action. So we see it as a kind of common blueprint for change upon which we want to begin mapping good practices that already exist to address the goals that we've presented, but also identify where gaps exist that need to be filled and create timelines for potential actions. And we think that's really important to sequence interventions in a more connected way. And so we made a number of commitments as part of this vision presentation. And the first of those commitments is that we'll build an online map of good practices related to research culture shifts, firstly with our members, but then secondly open to other research stakeholders and groups and initiatives, and that we will probably open this in the second half of next year. And we're going to use this vision as a basis for developing new collaborations with the research community. And this is really important because I think that research culture change starts with the work of researchers and research professionals, not at a policy level. And that was quite clear in even the initial framing of our priority at Science Europe, contributing to the evolution of research cultures, not leading it from a funders and performers perspective. The idea being that we listen to research communities, we hear what they want, what they expect from their systems, and then we try and develop policies and practices that can support that, and in doing so support the quality of research. We also made a commitment to keeping a research culture perspective in mind across all of our work. And as an example, as we begin to now tackle how to green research processes, how to make research processes more sustainable as part of our third priority, we are also now going to think about the research culture effects and consequences when we start to think about interventions there. And finally, we want to try and establish a way to track progress and build evidence of what works and also what doesn't moving forward. And it was in the discussions on what these next steps for us might be that we had an opportunity to reflect back on that early question of what do we mean by research culture and what does research culture change really look like. So we had that initial Royal Society definition as a basis. We focused on shared values and how we can make interventions to embed them. But now we want to look back and say, well, what have we learned? What does research culture change really look like to us? And we've been discussing this for about half a year now, and I have one example that I think demonstrates some of our thinking on this topic, but it's very much still a work in progress. And the example I'll give is about research data management. So this has been a big priority within open science for many research stakeholders in the last decade. At Science Europe, we produced some guidance on the international alignment of research data management practices and also a common template for data management plans back in 2018 and 2019. The objective of these were to encourage more fair and open sharing of research data, with a higher mission being that more fair and open data helps to improve the rigor and integrity of research processes, and in doing so also promotes research quality and impact. And at the level of research funders, encouraging research data sharing was done through mandating data management plans for those that were allocated grants. And it was supported by guidance and templates and training. And this was something that over the last few years, many of our members have done. And of course, it resulted in a change of behavior. When research data management plans are mandated, more data management plans are shared. But the question is whether this change in behavior alone constitutes a change in research culture. And I think our answer currently is that yes, in some way, but only partly. And we need to think a bit more deeply about these processes. It's certainly a starting point, but I don't think changing behavior alone constitutes culture change. I think we also need to think about, has this changed what is valued within the research system? Has it changed the attitudes of researchers and research professionals? It could be that researchers don't think that this is a worthwhile exercise. We know there is a lot of burden put on researchers currently, that their time is already very stretched, and that they are only doing this because they have to as part of their grant agreements. They see it as a kind of checkbox exercise. And in this case, it would not be considered for us a change in culture. I think a real signal of culture change, and particularly at an international level, would be, does a researcher who has previously been mandated to submit a data management plan continue to do so in future projects, maybe even in a different country, when they're not mandated to, because they see it as good research practice and because they value it and its contributions to their research processes. And I think for us, that would be a better and clearer signal of what research culture change might look like. And therefore, with all our actions, I think we need to think about not only how we change behaviors, but also how we support more sustainable shifts in attitudes and in what is valued, making these actions much more impactful on a longer term. So as we think about the next steps, about how we try and build evidence and track progress, there are some key considerations that we've learned from our work so far on research culture. And again, this is very much a work in progress, and I'd love any feedback on any of these aspects as we try and develop mechanisms for tracking progress moving forward. We know that we should think about this qualitatively. So it's not about creating metrics or any form of competition around research culture advances. And we should think about it at an aggregate level. So not thinking about how one individual action or intervention might improve research culture or not, but how actions as a collective, as a group of organizations within a national system, or as a membership organization like Science Europe, we're moving research culture forward, either nationally or institutionally or internationally. We should remain flexible and allow different national and institutional focuses, but also look for areas of common alignment. And I think DORA and DORA are great examples of this. We stopped talking about research culture in the singular because we heard from our members that they felt that there were different national cultures within Europe, and we needed to be we needed to think about that when we were thinking about common approaches as well. So to remain flexible, to allow institutions and national systems to have their own individual focuses, and not try and align where it's not beneficial. We need to think about timescales of actions and the ordering of interventions. And I think here the work done by Brian Nosek and his strategy for culture change is a really nice reference. So thinking about how we shouldn't be trying to require something when we've not already made it possible or recognized or easy to do, how this is a stepwise process, and that we need to think about how we make interventions that build on one another in an iterative process. We often hear from the research community that they're concerned by burden more and more each year. And so we need to make sure that we don't add unnecessary burden when we think about research culture interventions. I think we know that some of the actions will require more effort from both research organizations and researchers and reviewers. But we need to be really careful about the burden that we place on the communities that really underpin research systems. And that we need to embed both community input and self-appraisal across all actions, so that we make a system for change more reflexive than it has been previously. And finally, that we do everything with a reflection on those shared values. So we never lose sight of those shared values that we had right at the start of the process. And I'm going to close on one further action that we've been considering, and again, something that we would love anybody's feedback on. I think this group would be a really interesting discussion point for this as well. And it's the idea of establishing potentially something like an annual barometer for research culture change. So possibly a 1-year meeting of experts from different stakeholders, from different perspectives, with the objective of identifying overall whether research cultures within an institution or at a national level or internationally are moving in the right direction or in the wrong direction, and what types of actions we need to prioritize year on year to try and contribute to the evolution of research cultures in a more positive direction. Again, this is something that's very early stage. We're still discussing what this might look like, but I think it has the potential to be a nice way of thinking about whether we're making progress. And I think with that, I will leave it there. I'm very happy to take questions or just hear your perspectives on research culture as well.